Today we're looking at Taiwanese weddings, in particular the key component of a Taiwanese wedding, which is the wedding banquet. As any foreigner who's been invited to a wedding banquet knows, it's quite a memorable experience. You've got huge size, right? Typically several hundred guests, so many dishes of food, the bride dressed up to the nines in a glamorous dress. Well, actually not a glamorous dress. She makes 2 or more entrances in dresses of different colors. And the most memorable ones, I'd say, are the outdoor weddings. You know, the ones held on the street.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation. Formosa Files.
So, John, I was looking at your book, Formosan Odyssey. What year did you write that book?
2002.
In the book, you include a bunch of vignettes about small-town life in 1990s Taiwan. You have some colorful and, I don't know, even cutting observations about weddings. And you write, quote, "Perhaps the strangest thing I have ever seen in Taiwan was the noisy double act of a wedding and funeral, held at exactly the same hour, on the same day. And once again, it was small-town street theater with no better view than my balcony."
Yeah, I can still remember it, looking out from my 4th floor balcony, and there were these 2 lunchtime celebrations held out in the streets. The wedding one was under those tent canopies they set up, and the 2 groups, the wedding and funeral, were unrelated, except for having both chosen an auspicious day, which is a little odd, isn't it? You'd think they wouldn't.
I was going to say, how can both be auspicious? Yes.
Yeah.
But
yes,
so it goes.
Yeah. And they were only separated by 20 meters or so, and each was pulling out all the stops to make more noise than the other.
Yeah. I've often suggested that we switch the national anthem of Taiwan to the jackhammer because I feel it's something we could all get behind. Anyway, quote, you write, "The funeral was the full, spare no expense, rent a monk package, complete with chanting brethren in robes, bonfires of ghost money, a brass band, a massive convoy of karaoke trucks, and a professional wailer. A woman hooked up with a microphone and speakers whose job it was to cry and lament the passing of the old man, unrestrained by the fact that she'd never met him. A little down the road, the wedding hit back with the noise of hundreds of guests and a singer and musicians performing on the back of a truck fitted out with a monstrous stereo system."
Very colorful, very noisy. Just one of these by themselves is enough, but the 2 alongside each other, sensory overload.
Okay, but, maybe a bit of a cynical take.
Yes, when I reread the book, it's more negative than I might be.
You were younger and more acerbic.
Well, to be honest, I think it's more a case of things being so wild and weird back then, in the 90s. And of course, it was all rather surprising after New Zealand.
So, do you recall attending a wedding, not just looking at it from a balcony?
Yeah. So some of my early days here, early impressions of weddings, it was the size. Wow, hundreds of guests. Yeah, like I didn't know the bride and groom. And that wasn't that unusual amongst the guests, which is odd, isn't it? And the road setup was strange. You're sitting out on the street and you've got these sort of very basic primitive tent canopies. You've got round tables covered with plastic tablecloths, and they're set with plastic bowls, cheap disposable chopsticks, small plastic cups.
Yeah, you were saying that you didn't know the guests. I've been ushered into a couple of weddings where I was just walking by for some random reason, like sit down. Da, 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 da. So yeah, and plastic. You mentioned disposable plastic cups. A lot of plastic. Probably
a lot
not
of plastic.
So good.
Yeah, some metal in the form of 10 short little metal stools placed at each table. There's always 10 to a table. So yes, not exactly high elegance.
And rather hurried affairs as well. Guests turn up at about noon, hand over their red envelopes, sign a satin cloth, congratulate the newlyweds, get started on the food, and the food comes out, one dish at a time, usually 10 courses, maybe.
Yeah, 10, 12.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yes.
And then the bride and groom circulate, right? Toasting the guests at various tables. And from what I've heard, the key is that if you can't hold your liquor, the both of
Yeah,
them
yeah.
use green tea. It looks like
Yes.
beer or whiskey or whatever.
Yeah, there's no way you could get around toasting everyone with real liquor.
Well, unless it's you, of course.
Well, I have been designated as the chosen toaster on one occasion. Yes.
Good, good, good.
Yeah, and for me, the formal dress of the wedding party, the bride and groom especially, it's quite a bizarre contrast with the rough road setting with the plastic dishes and the caterers who are serving the food from these big woks and pans, and they're dressed in aprons and farming overalls and gumboots. It's yeah.
Yeah, 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 I know what you mean. And the food, well, I don't know, seafood mostly, yeah?
Yeah, so seafood's probably Taiwan's favorite food, and it has pride of place at a wedding.
Well, because people like it, and also it can be expensive. Some seafood dishes signal that the banquet's a good one, usually the more slimy sea cucumbery thing, the more
Yeah,
expensive. The slimier, the more expensive. Then there are other dishes like sashimi, mullet roe, lobster, shrimp, steamed fish. Oh, and of course, we mustn't forget shark fin soup. But I guess that's less common today.
yeah, less common. Well, wedding banquets are a bit more civilized today.
Yes, today they're usually held at restaurants. There are these hotel restaurants, or there are these dedicated buildings that are just only for wedding banquets.
Hmm.
But a lot of the features are the same, whether held indoor or out. So, okay, let's start with the invitation. You need to decide how much to give for the gift. That's money, not an actual gift. This is the hongbao, a red envelope. And the number should be an even number and a lucky number. And obviously, not many fours.
Yeah, yeah. I think I gave 2,600 NT the last time I went, but I don't remember.
It really depends on how well you know the couple. If
Hmm.
they're like
Yes.
close friends and you give too little, that's really buhao yi.
Yeah, I remember thinking that giving cash was a little bit too impersonal, too practical, but I'm actually a fan of it now. I think, yeah, practical is good. It's better than the Western tradition of giving gifts. And, it's logical. You're paying for the meal, and typically the hosts, well, the groom's side, they can make a little bit of profit, a little bit of money.
Exactly. The hongbaos for my wedding paid
Hmm.
for a very simple honeymoon. So just enough for that.
Hmm.
So anyway, you get your money, crisp new notes in the red envelope, and you arrive at the wedding. This is the part that's a little you hand your
Yeah.
money over and the helpers at a desk receive it and they pull it out of the envelope and they count it in front of everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a bit embarrassing. And then they write it in the book, John gave 200
Yes.
NT.
Hey.
Guess guest can sign a silk screen, guest book thing. And at that front reception, greeting the guests will be a large portrait of the newlyweds, also a photo album of the couple that you can leaf through. And, you're supposed to kind of do that and make cooing comments while looking at it.
Hmm.
And some small cards that have pictures. You take that as a souvenir. The card has a picture of the couple in some lovey-dovey pose.
So you sit at a round table with 10 chairs or stools if you're outside, and you're brought a succession of dishes. There might be 10, 12 courses. Now, the bride and groom make various entrances. Actually, each time the bride comes in, she's in a different dress. So this will usually be a total of 3 different dresses. And she's made up to look like a star. She's dripping with jewelry, and she's got lots of
Yeah, but
makeup on.
it's more like a Hollywood star or a Disney princess, not really anything Asian.
Yes, yes. It's a shame Taiwanese don't really have traditional clothing.
Hmm. Japanese have kimonos. The Koreans have the, hanbok? But in Taiwan, couples wear generally Western clothes. Although I have been to an indigenous wedding where they were
Yeah.
wearing their, their costume or their clothes. The
Yeah.
main dress is still, a white wedding dress.
Which is surprising, really, because white is a color associated with funerals. When you go to the funeral setup, you have a white envelope. Red is the color of good fortune.
If you go back 100 years, that's what brides would have worn: red dresses or a homemade gown or like a cheap hao.
Or given that Taiwan was a Japanese colony, a kimono was another option, well, for the urban elite following Japanese customs more closely.
The white bridal dress was occasionally seen in the Japanese colonial period, but it really only became popular after 1945 when the nationalist Chinese came here. The mainlanders had embraced the white dress, the Western style fashion, like decades earlier.
As I've mentioned in previous episodes, Chiang Kai shek and the nationalists, although they would later be seen as sort of arch conservatives, as guardians of China's ancient culture, they were revolutionaries when they started. They were fighting to overthrow the emperor, Qing dynasty, overthrow old customs. They embraced modern practices, outlawed foot binding, looked down on the practices of concubinage and arranged marriage. Yeah, they were modernizers, and along with that, they had the modern white dress.
And they also stopped people from having to wear that ridiculous hairstyle.
Oh, yeah, the queue, yes.
But yeah, speaking of the wedding dresses, among the leaders, the nationalist elite, right? White wedding dresses took hold. There's a well-known photograph of the 1927 wedding of Supreme Leader Chiang Kai-shek and Song Mei-lin. Well, he wasn't quite Supreme Leader then, but he is wearing a sharp Western-style suit, and she's in a white wedding dress.
Yes, and the Chinese brought their preference for white bridal gowns with them to Taiwan. And of course, there was a heavy American presence here on the island until 1979.
Just back to that wedding with CKS, technically, yep. Right? The tradition was white, symbolized purity, meaning like, your first marriage. That was not his first marriage.
Okay, but he wasn't wearing the white dress.
Good point. But just so people know, look it up on Wikipedia and you'll discover that he had a total of 4 wives in his lifetime.
Yeah, I get confused, the definition between concubine and wife. So Mei Ling was his 3rd or 4th?
Wikipedia lists her as his 4th wife.
Okay.
But back to what you said. So a heavy American presence in Taiwan until 79. And Taiwan once had a flourishing garment industry. Factories making clothes. Nowadays it's Bangladesh or Dominican Republic or something, but once it was all made in Taiwan. And that included wedding dresses for export to the United States. So there were people in Taiwan back in the day that had a knowledge of American bridal fashions.
Okay, so we've explained the white wedding dress, but how about the other dresses and what's with the heavily made up glamour look?
I guess it's a homegrown Taiwanese twist on something that might seem westernized. Central to the modern Taiwanese wedding tradition is the use of the services of a bridal, what is it, John? Saloon or
salon? Salon.
Salon, yes. These bridal or wedding salons provide clothes for the wedding shoot. They do makeup, take photographs, studio portraits, and then also those taken outdoors. And then later for the wedding banquet, this company would provide dresses, makeup, flower bouquets, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so previously these services were separate. Brides rented gowns from one business. They got photographs from a separate business. And makeup was done at a beauty salon.
The origins of how this evolved are murky, but it was in Taipei in the early 1980s that the whole photography and clothes thing came together. And by 1990, the makeup component was just part of the service.
It's not just a matter of combining services, but it's a whole new way of producing pictures and doing the wedding banquet. I mean, If you see wedding pictures from the 1970s and before, the contrast with what emerged in the 1980s is quite striking. If you're looking at an old album, you'll see just a few photographs from the wedding, very formal. You got one picture of the couple seated, one picture of them standing, and there'll be a group picture with the family and the bride and groom. And everyone looks kind of miserable in the photos.
It's true. They look grim. There's no smiling usually. Different from the glossy photo shoots that became popular in the 1980s.
But you can see some of these old photos in the front rooms of old people's homes.
And also the number and the size of the photographs, the whole style was very different.
Right. And you see couples putting their big poster-sized wedding photo up on their bedroom walls. Often it's behind the bed. I'm not sure about that. I wouldn't want to be reminded of my younger self and to look at this woman that doesn't really quite look like your wife, quite ghostly.
Yeah. So to recap, in the 1980s, we see the Taiwan wedding shop emerge, combining a photo studio with the whole beauty thing, the makeup, the clothes rental service, renting out the wedding clothes. So we don't buy dresses in Taiwan. You rent them.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also very practical. And I love that because, you wear it once. And the idea used to be you passed it down to the next generation or whatever, but that's long gone. Nowadays in America, people spend, some astronomical sum on a wedding dress and then they pack it up and put it in the attic, right? So we rent it. So yeah, all this sort of just combined to create an industry.
And this started in Taipei in two particular locations. First of all, it was Aiguo East Road, that's next to Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall, which was a favorite location for photo shoots with its gardens and buildings. And then Zhongshan North Road also became very popular.
But it wasn't long before that background, those backgrounds became a bit cliched and the photo shoots went further afield. There was intense competition between the studios.
Yeah, something of an arms race, a photo arms race for more photos, bigger photos, more exotic locations. The size of some of these photos is quite startling, at least 3 feet by 2.
John, did you notice that for a time they were doing things that were borderline illegal, like crossing over into, I can't remember exactly, but it was like, you shouldn't be in that fountain or you shouldn't be. Do you remember seeing some of those photos?
I missed that trend.
Okay.
Yes.
And then more recently, there ones were like they're in the ocean, halfway in the ocean or something.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, new styles and more exotic filming locations just sort of, revved up as time went on.
Yeah, friends of mine had a wedding photo shoot in Switzerland, I think it was. They paid for a photographer to go out there with them.
There's good money in life special events, weddings and funerals.
Right, you don't want to look cheap when you're buying a coffin or arranging a wedding. Always a question of face for the family.
Mm-hmm. In the late 1990s, wedding packages started out about $1,000 and then upmarket ones, maybe $4,000. Let's double or triple those prices today.
Yeah, yes. It's fun, isn't it, when you travel around Taiwan and you sometimes come across these couples being photographed in scenic locations. And, that day of the photo shoot is a really grueling one. It starts early with the bride's 2 to 3 hour makeover and hairstyling. And during the day, for each new outfit and location, there's actually a reworking of the hairstyle, adjustments to the makeup.
And think about the temperature down here in Kaohsiung, the makeup melting, the hairstyle. So from my personal experience, it was one of the things that made me say, my wife, this is going to work out. Because I was like, I'm not really into this whole photo thing. Number one, I don't think they're going to have suits for a guy who's 6'4", 192 centimeters. And I don't really want to spend 70,000 NT on all of this. And she was like, yeah, that's okay. We don't need to do it. So that was cool. But yeah, you were talking about, all that makeup, 2-3 hours of makeup and hairstyling. It will transform the bride so much that she sometimes looks unrecognizable. So
really.
Michael Jackson sort of thing. The most striking thing about the wedding pictures are these like ghost-like whiteness of the skin. All the imperfections, freckles covered up, and just generally the skin's made white. And I'm thinking that nowadays they go even further and then add, Photoshop effects or whatever AI smoothing efforts to it as well.
Yes. Fair skin has always been an ideal of beauty for Chinese women. I guess it was associated with wealth. You're not working outside.
Another feature of the wedding pics are the bride's eyebrows.
Right. Yeah, it's quite noticeable. Have a look at the eyebrows the next time you're looking at a wedding portrait. The stylist fashions the bride's eyebrows into sort of perfect symmetrical shapes. They use a razor to carve away hair and they use an eyebrow pencil to color it in.
I'm sure you've noticed, John, how many Taiwanese women have tattooed versions
Yes.
of eyebrows.
Yes, it's very common now. Yes.
I think, according to traditional Chinese beliefs, eyebrows are considered an expressive part of a woman's face, and they've also got something to do with predicting your fortune. Long, curving eyebrows are considered auspicious, so that's kind of the style you'll most often see.
And the wedding pictures have a similar look to them. The bride should be as beautiful as possible, and it's a glamorous kind of beauty. She should look like a movie star. And the photos should be romantic, should showcase the intimate relationship of the couple. So, although weddings are in many ways about the joining of two families, that family aspect is actually missing, is kept out of the wedding photos,
Yes.
which is odd. Instead, there are lots of pics of the couple embracing, playfully skipping through the meadows, staring lovingly at one another, and so on.
Yeah, some of them are really, really bad.
Yeah.
Some are cute. The photos are supposed to depict the couple as wealthy, worldly, sophisticated. So you got to have a background of something, palace-like building. There's the Chime Museum in Tainan,
Hmm.
which looks like something from Versailles or something. Romantic scenery of some sort or an upmarket interior. We are chic.
Chic, indeed. And by the 1990s, bridal photography, these bridal salons, you've got me saying saloons,
Yes.
these bridal salons, a huge industry in Taiwan. And, this is a homegrown development. It's made in Taiwan. But soon it would be exported to China.
Like everything else. Yep. In the late 1980s, China opened to Taiwanese investment. Famously, there was a flood of cheap manufacturing from Taiwan to China, so factories making umbrellas and bicycles, but Taiwan retail services would also eventually enter the market. Taiwan-style photography studios were a huge hit, and they really did transform the way that the Chinese did weddings. I guess back in the day, it was like a picture of two people in a Mao suit. Well, not in one Mao
Yeah.
suit, but in Mao suits. Part of a wave in the 90s, Taiwanese culture and music, as you've pointed out many times, John, reshaping Chinese society.
Yes, bridal photography was one of the first retail-oriented Taiwanese businesses to enter China, and I can understand why it was an instant hit among China's new and growing middle class. As you said, the Mao outfits and having to get permission from your work unit to marry.
Yes.
And the women especially, they've starved for decades for some makeup, clothes, beauty, some feminine glamour.
Victory gin for all.
Yes.
If you get that reference, you've read a few books. Okay, moving on. At first, wedding photos, definitely a luxury item. But a few Taiwanese companies opened in Beijing and Shanghai, and they spread. Local governments in China were happy for all the investment from Taiwan. They were happy for investment from anywhere at that point. And as the Chinese are very good at, they learned and copied and
Yep.
replaced.
Yep, that's what they did.
By the mid 2000s, the Taiwanese bridal companies, they'd been making good money, for like a decade, but mid 2000s comes around, Chinese studios squeeze them out of the market.
Yeah, it's a pattern you see with so many industries and products. Hard to compete with the locals, given their cost advantages and, all the local connections.
Okay, anyway, returning to Taiwan and wedding banquets here, what are some changes that we've seen?
Well, there's been a move away from the small town style outdoor weddings. They still happen, but less common. And there's also been a toning down of the entertainment.
Toning down of the entertainment. You could put it another way: fewer strippers. Okay. Wait, strippers may not be fair. Exotic dancers have become richer, and therefore they can now afford more clothing.
Yeah, we better explain. Traditional weddings had entertainers. Okay, you've got a stage, an MC, okay, a host with a microphone, usually a middle aged gentleman making racy jokes. You had singers and dancers, and the dancers would become heated and remove clothing.
Yeah, it's true. So the MC really, like you said, he'd be up there making dirty jokes for the most part,
Yeah.
laughing about this, laughing about that. So some of you might be thinking, okay, it's a lunchtime meal with women and children in attendance. We don't really mean strippers. Perhaps they have attractive young female dancers in tank tops and short shorts, perhaps dancing on vehicles or floats for some religious parades. No, actually, we mean not 100% naked.
But 99% naked, stripping down to bikini bottoms. I mean, like string bikinis, and being topless. Yeah.
I missed the topless, I think, mostly, but that 1% of clothing left over was rather see-through, as I recall.
Yeah, I've seen that. And we're not talking about a brief twirl on a stage with dried ice and mist covering things. You know, these performers, they get down off the stage, they mingle with the crowd. They're going around sometimes table to table, toasting the male guests.
They will get up and in the face of these male guests, and the other men at the party will be looking with hungry eyes, and there'll be some angry glares from the women folk.
Yeah, yeah. I must say, it's rather tacky. It makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And the entertainment provided at the banquets, I mean, the standout feature is just the loudness. You know, the folksy pop music is all sort of distorted through electric synthesizer sound and stereo madness. And the loudness makes it hard to have a conversation at the tables.
Dun 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 dun. Dun,
Ding,
dun, dun, dun,
ding.
dun, 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 dun. That's pretty much how every
Yeah,
Taiwanese song goes, as I
yeah,
see it.
yes, yeah.
Okay, well, I was interested to discover whether or not it is or was legal to actually be naked. So here's the letter of the law from Ross Darrell Feingold, Special Attorney to Titan Attorneys at Law in Taipei.
There could be potential violations of the Social Order Maintenance Act, 社会秩序维护法. Article 82 criminalizes obscene performances in public places, and the penalty is detention of not more than 3 days or a fine of not more than 12,000 new Taiwan dollars. Article 83 criminalizes wantonly exposing one's naked body or presenting a lascivious posture in a public place, and the penalty is a fine of not more than 6,000 new Taiwan dollars.
All right. Thank you, Ross. And if you're in legal trouble for stripping off naked and breaking that, make sure to get a hold of Ross Darrell Feingold. Thankfully, the trend now, as you noted, are for smaller, more civilized wedding banquets. There's less desire to show off or, directly show off. Less of that 热闹, which you could directly translate as heat and noise, couldn't you?
Yeah, and through the decades, there have been flows back and forth on the conspicuous consumption front, pushes against it.
Yeah. I was just thinking about the Japanese trying to stamp out various practices. Excessive spending, they thought, was, not Japanesey.
Yeah, not weddings as such, but I'm thinking of one particular target was Ghost Month festivals in Geelong. There might be like 300 pigs sacrificed for that.
Oh, and the Japanese were like, that's 299 too many.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, and the Chinese nationalists here, they also pushed back against excessive spending. during the martial law era, there was an organization called the Committee for the Improvement of Folk Customs, which was aimed at reducing superstitions and reducing extravagance.
So that would be from the late 1940s to the end of martial law in 1987.
Yep.
There was a great Taiwan in Time article in the Taipei Times about this. If you don't know Taiwan in Time, look it up. There's a Facebook page, of course. Great column. So an agent from this Committee for the Improvement of Folk Customs would visit a family planning a wedding and say, we encourage frugality. And they'd suggest that an alternative public display of wealth could be, hey, why don't you hand out money for school scholarships to worthy children? So here's a quote from the article. Those who donated the amount for scholarships received a certificate from the government. Big money donors were personally commended by the mayor. The city's district offices competed in donations received, end quote.
The article says that by 1984, nearly 6,000 students had benefited from the scholarships.
Okay, so maybe not such a bad thing. And as Taiwan starts getting richer in the 1970s and 1980s, the government continues promoting frugal ways. But by this point, not that many people are listening. Keep the weddings small, simple. Don't hire musicians and dancers. Wasn't exactly...
That didn't work out that
no.
well, did it?
No.
There was a great release of energy and money after the end of martial law. Quite a vibrant time, wasn't it?
What's most interesting, perhaps today, John, is the lack of weddings that I see.
Yeah, we're not worried about extravagance. We're worried about not enough people getting married, not enough children.
Did you see that stat that said by 2070, the population of Taiwan is headed for 15 million?
Yeah, I've seen all kinds of stats. It's unexpected, isn't it? I'm old enough to have grown up with population bomb fears.
All right. Well, I guess we can wrap that up with congratulations to anyone who might be getting married soon. May you have a long and happy marriage. Gongxi, gongxi.
Yes, we can both highly recommend marriage, can't we, Eryk? It keeps a man off the bottle, mostly.
For the most part. Yeah, there's a stabilizing factor that's just hard to beat, isn't it?
Yes, it's a sort of a dual civilizing mission across the genders, yes.
All right, thanks for listening this far into this episode of Formosa Files. I'm Eryk Michael Smith.
I'm John Ross. Bye.